My name is Huland Nations. My date of birth is 10/9/40. I was born in Prairie Grove, Arkansas. My parents were Claude Nations and Violet Nations. Violet English Nations, actually. I lived on South Pittman Street. Actually, it was on the corner of Cleveland and Pittman. Father came home from World War II and had some problems and spent a big part of his life in and out of VA hospitals. And when he finally got released, he ran the water and sewer and street department for the city of Prairie Grove for several years before he bought the sawmill from my grandfather. My mother was his secretary. My grandfather, that's all he ever did was run a sawmill. And most of the time he was in the Strickler area. Back then they would move the sawmill to the timber rather than bring timber to the sawmill. And he moved to Prairie Grove in probably around 1953 or 54. And he ran the mill here until the early 60s when his health failed him, and then my dad bought the sawmill from him. This was my mother's father. It wasn't my dad's father that was the sawmiller. I started in about 1965. I was running a logging crew, and for 3 or 4 years or so, that's what I did, and Dad ran the sawmill. And then they talked him into coming back to the city, so I started running the sawmill and hired another crew to do the logging. When my dad bought the sawmill from my granddad, he quit managing the city stuff and ran the sawmill. And then after I had been there for a few years, why, they were wanting him to come back to the water department anyway, and so he did, and then that's when I started running the sawmill. Later on, we started drying lumber and finishing it, and we'd bought another building, the old Keaton property, and he came back. He quit the city again, and he was running the dry lumber yard, and I was still running the sawmill. At one time, I worked for the telephone company for about a year, maybe a year and a half, between college. I went to the university for a while and then quit and laid out I was just going to lay out a semester, but I wound up a little over a year, and I was working for the Prairie Grove telephone company. Other than that, that's about the only real job I ever had besides the sawmill. Actually, I was born at the Elizabeth Hospital, which is no longer there. The Elizabeth Hospital in 1940, of course, I don't remember, but they had, Dr. Manning came later. Dr. Rigall and his brother was there when I was born, and he was there until its final demise, and then Manning came. But it was just a fairly nice hospital. Probably, I'd say they had 10 beds, and they did surgery and the whole bit. I remember I had a broken leg playing football, and they reset it. And then William Giles, I said I didn't work for anybody else, but I worked for him after hours at school and on the weekend. And he got his arm in a silage cutter and cut his arm off below the elbow, and they did that kind of surgery. But they delivered a lot of babies. My dad, anyway, loved to hunt and fish, and we did a lot of that. And, of course, my mother liked to travel, and they would go places, and I'd stay home and hold down the fort. But we had a bunch of beagles, and that was our big sport. My dad and I would hunt with the beagles. Nearly every weekend there was a bunch of folks around town that had beagles, and we'd all get together and go rabbit hunting, we'd call it. Whatever they'd pick up while they would run, whether it was a rabbit or a fox or a deer or whatever, but that was the big deal. I went to school in the new school, we called it. I was one of the first classes. I was the first class. I believe that I was in the 8th grade when they opened the school up. Our old school was an old 3-story brick building and had steps going from one level to the other, and when you change classes and several people start up the steps, plaster would fall off the walls. And the grade school was a lot better. I mean, it was built better, but the building, I don't know the date that it was built, but it was old, and it sure needed to be replaced. We didn't have a gym back then, played basketball outside on the dirt. Some of my classmates were Tommy McCoy, and Larry Bell, and Billy Joe Bartholomew, and Corky Kurtzinger. Oh, of course, the girls, it was Betty Bell and Connie Hamilton. Now it was Connie Martin, Melba Garrett, Shirley Sharp. Oh, we didn't have a real big class. I think when we graduated, there was like 25. We started out in the first grade, there was about 60, and they kept dwindling and dropping out. A lot of the guys that we started with didn't finish the 10th grade. Miss Cook was I believe she was our 6th grade teacher. Nora Rogers from Lincoln was our 5th grade teacher. And then there was a Miss Butler. Actually, there was 2 Miss Butlers. They were sisters that taught. Then there was a Mrs. Coddington. She taught a year or 2. And then, of course, on up the way, when we moved to the new school, Martha Moore, she was from Lincoln. Mr. Cornwell was the superintendent. J.C. Dills was the coach. Oh, who all was it? Martha Weaver was a math teacher. Of course, the classes were a lot bigger then than they are now. Most of our classes would have 40 people or more in them. And of course, I don't know what happens nowadays, but we had some really good teachers for that era. And then they had a Trades Day Association back then that always once a month would have drawings on Main Street. They had you'd get tickets for different things that you'd bought and put in a barrel, and they'd spin it around, draw them out, and people would win prizes. And then at Christmas time, they'd have a Santa Claus, which I played Santa Claus one year myself, and give out sacks of candy to kids and let them sit on your knee and tell you what they wanted for Christmas. And all the merchants would donate. Howard Fiddler was kind of in charge of that part of it. And they'd donate, and he'd buy the candy, and then they'd come in little sacks, and Then there'd be an orange too, usually, plus a sack of candy that all the little kids would get. Well, of course, I just lived 2 blocks from Main Street, but my grandparents, my mom's parents, lived at Strickler, and that was a half-a-day job. It was dirt road all the way, and a lot of people back then still drove horses and wagons, and they'd park them behind the Southern Mercantile. I never will forget that. And it was just, very, very few paved roads around. It was all dirt, and coming to town was a big deal. That wasn't like now you run to the grocery store to get a stick of butter. I mean, you come to town, you shop for your groceries for a week or more anyway. Some of the stores that we'd go to we had 2 drug stores. Both of them had soda fountains, and the kids kind of hung out there. And then they had 2 dry goods stores where you'd buy your clothes, the Crescent and Neal's Dry Goods. And we'd all go to those. And then grocery stores, there was, I think, 3, Southern Mercantile and IGA, and there was another one south of town, Valines' grocery store. Had a little stockyard there too. People would go there, and it was a feed store that he bought hides and cream and eggs and whatever. That was Leighton McCoy's. Well, if you needed any feed, that's where you went to get feed for chickens or whatever. But that was probably we had a Howard Fiddler store. Oh, what was it? It wasn't True Value back then, but it was kind of a hardware store and had toys, and people spent a lot of time there. The Sawmill, when we first started, we ran on steam. Not many people would believe that, but we ran on. That's all my granddad ever used was steam. And as a matter of fact, I've still got one of the old steam engines. But we would buy logs from anybody that back then, of course, people logged with teams mostly. And there was several different ones scattered around in the general area that would hit a lick every now and then. And we'd saw anything we could to make $1. Sold some cross ties and some pallet lumber, and Fulbright Industries in Fayetteville bought, they bought a lot of different kinds. They made a lot of furniture, baby furniture mostly, and they'd use soft hardwoods for that. And then they'd buy oak, and they made a lot of parts for pickup racks, which you never see anymore, but back then they did. And then there was a place in Berryville that bought a little different kind of thicknesses anyway, and they made flooring for semi-trailers. And we sold a lot of local lumber, sold a lot for chicken houses back then, and corrals and barns and just farm use. It was, like I say, anything we could do to make $1, why, we'd saw it. Well, it ran till about 10 years ago. I ran it about 35 years by myself. And of course, we at one time, we couldn't get rid of our slabs. We were sawing more lumber and producing more slabs than we could get rid of. So we bought a machine to make shavings. We'd run our slabs through that and make shavings, and we'd deliver them to chicken houses and dairy barns and things like that. Eventually we wound up with 2 machines, and then finally, it kind of, gasoline went up to about 38 cents a gallon, and we decided that gas cost so much we couldn't make any money. So we quit, started bundling our slabs and selling them to a charcoal mill. But you didn't make any money, but you got rid of them, and that was the main thing. When we went to electricity is when we started making more lumber and more slabs. In the late 60s, probably 5 years or so after Dad bought the mill, we didn't run on steam too long. It was always a pain. It was something wrong all the time, old boiler, it's hot in the summertime. Good job in the winter, but and it sounds real good that you use your waste to fuel your mill with, make steam with, our slabs, cut them up and throw them in there. But every time you'd get to going real good, something would happen. Either the boiler would blow a tube, or bearing would go out on the steam engine, or we had 2 steam engines, one to run the big saw and one to run a cutoff. And it was just, I wouldn't take anything from my experience, but I'd shoot myself if I had to do it again. The battlefield park, when I was a kid, my dad got me a job with Fred McChristian. And Fred, I think, is responsible for the park being what it is today. I was making 50 cents an hour working for Fred, and we spent most of the time at the battlefield park mowing and cutting brush and planting trees and doing various things. He was instrumental in, the pavilion was there, what I remember, but the tower that came from Ray's Mill, Fred did that, and 2 or 3 of the old log cabins, he did that. He had a fellow named Virgil Couch. I helped him some on the weekends, but Virgil Couch would tear those old buildings down and mark them, and then put them back exactly like they were. But Fred did all that on his own and paid for it out of his pocket. And he sure, I don't think, got the recognition that he deserved. Of course, he wasn't trying to get recognition. He just enjoyed doing that and wanted to see it prosper. But the first memory I had, when we'd go up there to the battlefield park, around behind that pavilion was whiskey bottles and beer cans, and that's where everybody went to just get drunk and that kind of thing. And of course Fred cleaned all that up eventually, and he was responsible for starting it, sure was. But Prairie Grove was always a real friendly, clean little town. There wasn't a bunch of trash and junk piled around in people's yards, and I was real proud to say that I lived in Prairie Grove. Still am. It was just a good little town, I enjoyed my childhood. Used to, in Prairie Grove, I knew everybody. Now, I hardly know anybody. Of course, it's so much bigger, and the people, a lot of them that I grew up with and knew and did business with are gone. They passed on, and we have a lot of lot of new folks, but it's I think they're education minded, and I know my two granddaughters love it here, and both of them do well in school, and they have good teachers, and I'm just proud of my town.